Dalvin Cook, different situation. And there was another trade that was close back in March. I shouldn't say close. There was another trade that was discussed in advanced terms back in March with Miami. And at that point, the Dolphins would have taken on the full contract. It didn't happen for multiple reasons. Then once you get past the draft and teams have spent money and they may have drafted guys at the position, it's a lot harder to justify trading for an $11 million contract. Now, again, like I said earlier, Dalvin Cook is going to get money. I don't know that it's $11 million hard, but he probably gets upside to somewhere in that range. And he certainly, I would anticipate, gets a strong contract in terms of the base value of it, just because he's still a very unique weapon. I got a text from somebody earlier in the show with a different team in the division saying, I'm glad he's gone. Ask him what happened, and then just saying, I'm glad he's gone. Because he is a difference maker. Yeah. The Vikings think they can get similar productivity from Alexander Mattison. They want to conserve resources to go pay Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. Cook wasn't going to redo his deal and take a cut to get traded to a team. So what happens? You get to a certain point. You don't want to drag it out with a Ring of Honor type of player. And you release the guy. Now he's sitting out there, and we'll see exactly when the market comes together here. But I think that people have gotten spoiled, frankly, in terms of fans, in terms of media. There have been so many trades over the past couple of years and so many bonkers fantasy football, Madden-style trades. Everyone's like, well, why couldn't you do this and that? It's like, it's complicated. Everybody says, the cap isn't real. Here's an example of why it is. This is exactly the type of example here, because teams had to figure out, in terms of short-term and long-term asset management, what can you really afford right now? It's not that you don't have $11 million in cash. Most teams do. It's not that you couldn't rework contracts to fit $11 million in for a Dalvin Cook. You could in a lot of cases. But then you're pushing that stuff out to the future. And if you're a Vikings team that's got these other priorities and you're trying to do what they've called the competitive rebuild, continue trying to compete. They won 13 games last year.
Right.
They went 13-4, and since then have released Eric Kendricks, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, traded Zadarius Smith, let Pat Peterson leave in free agency. That's a lot of turnover with your core parts. But what have they done? In all those cases, they've replaced them with somebody younger and cheaper. Alexander Mattison, who's not that much younger than Dalvin Cook. Actually, I think he is. I think he's like 25. He's a younger guy. But you get him for $3.5 million. You get Jordan Addison in the draft. You figure that's going to replace Adam Thielen, who's getting toward the end of his career, got a really good contract with Carolina because they valued the veteran receiver presence, but you go and get that guy. These are the complicated decisions that GMs have to make, and the cap is one of the reasons for that. So the salary cap exists. You do have to manage it in a longitudinal way. Even if short term, you can do what the Saints have done for years. You can do what some other teams have periodically done, which is max it out, redo contracts, push your pain into the future, go for your window right now. And you can tell when you look around at the league at the teams that are doing that versus the teams that are amassing assets for future years, what type of position people are in. Go back to the draft in April. The Cardinals picked up an extra 2024 first-round pick, and I want to say 2 2024 second-round picks in that draft just by their trades back at a time that they're clearly going into, we need to really tear it down and build it back up mode. They know they're not going to win this year. Kyler Murray's not going to be healthy at the start of the season. You're going to be challenged. You're trying to get a program going the right direction, but you put all of it, all right, push it all out here. It's not tanking in the classic sense of the term. You're not trying to lose, but you're not trying to win.
Right, exactly.
Not right now.
Yeah,
you're trying to win big picture, long term. It's not Mark Madsen shooting 3-pointers here. You're just simply using your resources differently. Then look what the Broncos did. It's the same thing that Sean Payton did for years in New Orleans, which was max it out, spend big in free agency, trade up. They trade a future pick to go up into the third round and get Riley Moss, the corner from Iowa. They trade a future pick for that on a team that last year was bad for a lot of different reasons and is competing in maybe the toughest division in all of football. Because Sean doesn't think in terms of, well, let's tear it down and we'll take 2 years to build this up. No, Sean's ready to win. Sean's ready to win right now. I asked him about this in March when we sat down at the league meetings. And I said, in New Orleans, you had this history where you maxed out the cap, you pooled assets, you kept your veteran players around. What, if anything, would you do different in Denver? And his answer, I'm paraphrasing only slightly here, was, why would we do anything different? It worked. That's his mindset, which is he's going to go to Denver and do the same thing. Is Russell Wilson going to perform up to the level that they can do that in 2023? We'll see. There's a lot of different things that go into it. He has dropped weight. You can see visibly Russell Wilson looks different right now.
Good, yeah.
So if his mobility's back, if it helps him stay healthier, they are going to be better on the offensive line because they spent so much money there.
Right.
They think that they've upgraded some other positions around the field. They're one of the teams I have no clue this year. I know Sean Payton's a really good coach. I know Russell Wilson has been previously in his career. You have to go back a little ways, but he's been a really good player in the league. And they've put some really good young talent in there in terms of Javonte Williams is going to be coming off an injury. Pat Surtain's a really good young player. They've had good drafts with George Payton. They do have pieces there. But are they going to go all the way to competing with the Chiefs or even the Chargers? What are the Raiders this year? I think it's all fascinating. I want to, at some point this week, too, get into the Jimmy Garoppolo situation again. One of the classic stories that only exist in May and June. Let's put it that way. We'll talk about that later on.
Yeah, real quick, Tom, though. You mentioned how wild the trade market has been in the last few years in the NFL. What's been that one trade for you where you were just like, whoa, I did not see that. What is that number one
I
trade?
try not to get caught off guard.
Of course.
There are trades that like pop up kind of out of nowhere just in terms of like, oh, that's going to happen. And it might not happen that day. It might not happen for a week. It might not happen for a month. But, I mean, there were all those quarterback trades a couple of years ago. I mean, those were, again, we basically broke or were right there on all of them. So, like, you kind of knew. But when you took a step back to go, whoa, this is big time. I mean, the one in free agency this year that I broke was when Darren Waller got traded from the Raiders to the Giants. And that wasn't like shocking in terms of, we all knew Darren Waller was available. Mm-hmm. He had been available since the previous year. I still had a draft in my Twitter account, which I have all kinds of different things. I just like refused to delete because someday they might happen. And I had one. It was the absolute oldest tweet draft I had, and it was from over a year earlier.
That would be a fun bit going through Tom's draft.
Darren Waller traded to the Packers.
Right, I remember.
Which was going to be part of the Devontae Adams trade until that didn't work out for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it would have had to have been two separate trades because you can't trade franchise tag players. But I had the Darren Waller one in there. It was 7 minutes from when I got the call that this is happening to when I reported it. Because it was just like, it was out of nowhere. And then it was, it's being finalized right now. And it was shocking only from the regard that no one had talked about that. No one had been talking about the Giants and Darren Waller. There wasn't a rumor. There wasn't a report. Nothing. I mean, that was a good one. I think that the sheer scope of, the size of the Russell Wilson trade.
Right, the compensation.
Was one that took people off guard. Yeah. But they were talking in those terms for a long time leading up to that. We'll see. In year 2 of Russell Wilson, year 1 with Sean Payton.
Even Tyreek Hill, that was the one that apparently, caught fans and people off guard as well.
That was a unique one because they had his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, had been calling around to teams like several days before because contract talks gone sideways with the Chiefs. I heard on like a Friday or Saturday night, I got a text from a team, why is Drew calling us about trading for Tyreek Hill? Which made me go, okay, so this is going to be real. And it happened like 3 or 4 days later. And so we knew he was getting traded, and it was down to the Dolphins and the Jets. And he ended up choosing the Dolphins. But, yeah, I mean, that's, again, why did the Chiefs do that? It goes back to my original point here, which was the Chiefs did that because a Tyreek Hill contract, it's 30 on paper, it's really 25, but $25 million. With that $25 million, they went out and they signed Juju, and they signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and they picked up picks, and they had additional resources. They could completely change the way that they were set up from a resource management standpoint because they just weren't going to pay him at that type of a level. So for the Chiefs, it worked out great because they got a first-rounder and more for a player who probably did not have a future there. They weren't going to be able to work out a contract with him. And the Dolphins get a guy that they were willing to pay, and they thought he was a missing piece, so go out and get him.
Right.
What did Jalen Ramsey get traded for? There's a lot of these examples of these trades where, again, you kind of know who's out there and who's available. It's a matter of where does that compensation settle? And it's based on so many factors between the contract, between timing, what teams are willing to, is there competition? Is the player willing to go multiple places? The player can nix the trade by just going, I'll retire before I go there.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.